Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to today's webinar, Essentials of Project Management from our Build Your Career webinar series. My name is Scott Levine, and I am the membership manager here at the IEEE Computer Society. Each month, we will be hosting a webinar on vital business skills that will help you excel at your current job and be helpful throughout your career. Topics will be on communication skills, verbal and written, body language, interviewing tips, and confidence building, to name a few. Before we get started, I would like to address some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and tomorrow you will receive an email with both the slides and the recording of today's webinar. You can ask any questions in the Q&A box you see on your screen. Adam will answer as many questions as possible following the presentation. If possible, please reference the slide your question refers to. As mentioned, joining us today is Adam Schmidt, a former Army officer who is currently the founder of Smart Summit Coaching, LLC. Adam has more than 15 years of leadership and consulting experience and has an exceptional ability to guide others through all phases of their career. As the founder of Smart Summit Coaching, Adam conceptualized, structured, and launched a leadership development company that partners with his clients in thought-provoking and creative processes that inspire them to maximize their potential. Adam is certified in several areas of expertise, including holding a project management professional certificate, obviously a key reason why he's our speaker today, as well as being a professional certified coach by the International Coaching Federation. Adam, thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate it, and great to be with everyone today. So as Scott mentioned, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a subject that deserves a lot of time. Now, it's the essentials of project management, and many of you would probably point out, well, look, we could spend an entire semester, if not even an entire undergraduate or even graduate degree in the project management space. But today, we're going to focus on just the essentials. And when we say the essentials of project management, we really want to focus today on language, just building language around what's important in project management. Less so about the mechanics of it and how to book resources, how to allocate full-time employees or FTEs, and just think about the words that we use within project management. The reason I want to take that approach today is to try to build a foundation for you. So as you find the areas of project management that you're either interested in or maybe don't know enough about, or someone asks you about to accomplish as a leader in your current role, and you just don't feel ready for that, you'll know what to look for and know what words to use to explain what you do well, what maybe you need some work in, and areas that you need to explore more. So I hope your focus today can just be around language and understanding some of the fundamental pieces that go into developing a project management plan. We'll spend about 45 minutes or so talking, and then I'll do my very best, my level best, to answer as many questions as I can. Here's our webinar for today, our webinar outline for today. First, we're going to talk about the word project, where it falls in the scheme of project and program and portfolio management. Lots of P words there. We're going to talk about scope, schedule, resources, and then risk, and how those things combine to create a project management plan. So again, we're just going to cover these 4 or 5 basic areas today to give you a better understanding around some of the language in project management. So what is a project? And you can all read the definition there that I've pulled from ISO 9000, and that's the sort of industry standard, industry global standard, I should say, for what a project is, right? A series of controlled and coordinated tasks that have start to finish dates, and they're undertaken to achieve a larger objective. But this word project gets thrown around a lot, and I'd like to offer that it actually has a very specific meaning. And I hope that what you can take away today from this small section in the webinar is when we use the word project, we're being specific about what we mean. In the stack of the elements we're looking at today, a project is a collection of tasks from the bottom to the top, and typically any organization, but especially consulting firms, construction firms, design firms, We see tasks as the lowest level, projects as a collection of tasks, programs as a group of projects, and a portfolio as a group of programs. The distinction I want to make here is important because we hear a lot of people use words like project management and program management interchangeably, when those are actually two completely different skill sets. What we'll be talking about today is just the project management. So we want to manage a group of tasks, a group of coordinated tasks with clear start and finish dates. So when we think about projects, we know what we're talking about now, kind of this lower middle slice of the hierarchy of how we get work done in a typical either commercial or industrial setting. Tasks, projects, programs, then portfolios. I'll make one broad connection here to how this translates into our work life. When we think about the people that are associated with these things, I'll offer a few general terms or titles that we often associate with these. If you're managing a portfolio, you may have a title that's in the world of vice president. That's typically what we call people who are overseeing portfolios. In the consulting world, sometimes they're called partners or even principals. If you're in charge of a program, you might be called a director. So directors typically have programs. Those are also called senior associates sometimes. Lower level principals is also a word I've seen around programs. For project, we typically use the word manager, be it junior manager, senior manager. Those are typically names that we associate with those running projects. And then for tasks, we think of analysts, action officers, support staff, all of the other titles that go along with our tasks that need to get done. So I offer that really, again, very loosely. I'm sure many of you can offer examples where you'd say, well, I run a portfolio, but I'm called a manager. That's absolutely fine and correct. Just offering in general for especially those on the call who are least experienced, what we might expect to hear when someone runs a portfolio. That's a vice president, a program, a director, a project is a manager, and a task is usually, again, an analyst, an action officer, a management analyst, something along those lines. Now that we've got the word project kind of defined in the space that we're operating in, probably the reason for your attendance today is I need to appreciate what a project management plan is and the distinctions that we make within a project management plan between how they're developed and what they're meant to do. To start that conversation, I'd like to offer that there's two big flavors of industry standards in the program management plan world. The first is the Program Management Institute, PMI. Maybe many of you on this call have the PMP certification, which comes from the Program Management Institute. The PMP is a program management professional. It's a certification you can seek through a certain amount of experience and then a certain amount of study and finally an exam that you can take to sort of certify, capture, and document your knowledge around the program management space. The second one I'll mention is Prince 2. We see this more often with work in Europe and in Asia. For many years, I was a consultant in Belgium, and the biggest concern there was that every project manager has a Prince 2 certification. Now, Prince 2 and PMI are similar in many ways. The first being the most obvious, they are both project management plan structures or frameworks to work within. The big distinction I'll make between them, and just to kind of put in your back pocket as you think about the certifications that might be relevant to you or you might be interested in pursuing, is that the PMI or PMP certification from the Project Management Institute really focuses on a strategic level arc of a project to bring a project from start to finish, and how do we control, execute, and coordinate that project. Prince 2 is much more data focused. Prince 2 is about the resources required, milestones, products that need to be delivered. If I can summarize it quickly, I would say Prince 2 is very focused on the numbers, the logistics associated with getting a project done. PMI might be more focused, again, on that higher level strategic view, what we're going to talk about in a minute, the work breakdown structure. So thinking about who is going to do what when and when will they be finished. So I'll stop there with project management plans, but I do want to make that distinction as those on this call begin to become comfortable with what certification they might seek or might be most relevant to their work. Thinking about the second part of our conversation today, before we move into schedule, resources, and risk, I want to talk about scope. Now, scope is a key part of any project management plan, and it is the beginning and end where everything starts. Your scope statement defines the boundaries of a project. It includes the who, what, when, where, and why of a project. Everything you need to know about a project can be summarized into one sentence. Now, some of you might be thinking, Adam, that's not possible. There's too many details to cover. And you're right, there are a lot of details to cover. But a project manager's responsibility is to distill and simplify what the objective of a project is and boil it down into a single scope statement that tells someone what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how that and when they're going to complete it by. I'd like to offer a scope statement as an example. And you can see the last bullet there that I want to highlight, that it's the first thing a project manager or project leader would develop. Just to kind of hear what a simple project management scope statement sounds like, it'll go something like this. No later than the end of the month, Working Group A will produce a 10-page report on the ice cream market to inform the CEO's decision on market entry. So I'll just read that one more time and listen for the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why of a project. No later than the end of the month, there's the when. Working Group A, there's the who, will produce a 10-page report, there's the what, on the ice cream market to inform the CEO's decision on market entry. There's the why. Now, there are many, many details that go into that, right? How are they going to approach this research? What are we doing talking about ice cream? Why not frozen yogurt as well? But those are details that will be buried within the project management plan itself. A scope statement is that concise summary that really captures what's going on within the project. It's the baseline talking point for any project manager to say, Scott, what is your project all about? And we know the scope statement can share everything. Who is doing it, when they're doing it, why they're doing it, and what they're doing. As you go through the course of a project, our instinct tells us that, well, that scope is going to change, and it's going to change pretty often, many times. We get new guidance from our boss, maybe our peers encourage us to look in a new direction. Maybe we find out during the scope of our initial research of the ice cream market that we do need to look at frozen yogurt too, because the market includes that item. I want to just talk a little bit about a very simple process called scope management. Now, I've boiled this down today to a very simplistic level, but in general, we start at the 12 o'clock. A scope change request was raised. That can just be, hey, everybody, I think we need to look at frozen yogurt too. The request is documented, so we make sure we know exactly what the scope change might include. An impact analysis. As a project leader, we need to decide, will this extend our timeline? Do we need to go from 10 pages to 20 pages in this report? Is this going to require more research? Do I need to hire, to use my silly analogy, a frozen yogurt expert to come in and help us now? What is the impact of this scope change on a report? Stakeholder assessment and discussion. This is the project leader and the key stakeholders within the project determining, is this possible? And if they decide it is, they'll then modify the scope, and around this cycle we go throughout the life cycle of a project. At the end of the day, a project leader is typically empowered to decide whether or not a scope change is important enough, a scope change is valid enough and relevant enough to actually include in a project. There are many times where we're offered a scope change or encouraged to make a scope change where we might want to push back and say that actually sounds like an entirely separate project. I might recommend that Working Group B, instead of Working Group A, take on the research into frozen yogurt. It's simply too much to add for Working Group A's workload, or something to that effect. With our scope defined, and again, just thinking about the language we're using today, we've now talked about project, what that means, scope, what that means. I'd like to offer a little bit, and this is a 40-second shot of something that people spend a lifetime working on, a work breakdown structure. A work breakdown structure is a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by a team. The dictionary that supports a WBS is a document that describes what each task is doing. Now, a work breakdown structure is easier to see as a picture. So I'm going to go to the next slide just to show you what it looks like, because it can be a little bit hard to conceptualize in black and white. A work breakdown structure divides our projects into individual tasks, and then those tasks are then subordinated by subtasks. So in this example, task 1 has subtasks 1.1 through 1.3. You'll find as you go through your project management life where subtasks go on and on and on. You will have a subtask 1.1.1.1.4, or whatever is required for the size of a project. If we're just talking about a report on ice cream, something like this might work. If we're talking about building a new high-rise building in the middle of New York City, we're going to have a huge work breakdown structure. And it's that dictionary that will describe each of the tasks, who's responsible for them, what the timeline is for each of those tasks. A work breakdown structure gives us a quick snapshot of the key elements of our project and where each of the work elements is being done. Notice that we're using those words again, project and task. We said before, that a project is a series of tasks, and here they are. Project to task to subtasks. Work breakdown structures are a huge part of organizing your project in a methodical way and a great way to show your superiors, peers, subordinates alike what's happening in the scope of a given project. We've talked about the word project. We've talked about scope, including work breakdown structures. I want to spend a little bit more time on schedule. A plan that details when work will be accomplished, provides a common understanding of the progression of work, and indicates when things are off track. Now, schedules, when we get in the business of project management, are typically more than just timeline. They look at several different things, and let's talk about them for just a moment. Interdependencies, the things within the project that rely on one another. And to highlight this point, I'll actually just skip back to my work breakdown structure here. What if we had a situation where subtask 3.1 was reliant on the results from subtask 2.2? That is a project interdependency. It would require that we organize our schedule in a way that subtask 2.2 be completed before 3.1 is started. Interdependencies happen all the time. If we think about building that high-rise building, we're going to have to dig the hole before we pour the concrete, before we begin building on top of that. We can't make progress in certain tasks until other tasks are completed. That's a very simple concept. I'm sure all of you can grasp it very quickly, but just know that in the context of project management, interdependencies become very tricky very quickly, and they lead us to a scheduling technique called the critical path method, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Personal and project calendars. When we think about a project schedule, it's always important to consider what is happening in the lives of your project staff. Now, if we're doing this working group A ice cream report that I mentioned earlier as sort of a notional silly project, we want to make sure that not all our staff is going on vacation. We want to make sure that not all our staff is unavailable for other projects. What fraction of these people can we work with? I mentioned earlier FTEs, full-time employees, and many of you have probably heard that. For those who haven't yet on this call, FTE is sort of an industry standard term we use to talk about a full-time employee. So 1.0 FTE might not mean an entire human. It might mean pieces of different people that add up to a single individual's horsepower, the horsepower of one person to do an FTE's worth of work, a full-time employee's worth of work. So as we think about our project calendars, we need to look across our calendars of our personnel and say, what's going on here with our resources? People are our resources, of course. We need our scope statement that we mentioned before. How do we build a schedule if we don't know who's doing the work, what we're doing, when it's due by, and why we're doing it? Project risks. We're going to talk more specifically in a few minutes about how to build a risk matrix, but we can't appreciate a schedule unless we understand the risks at stake. Oftentimes, schedules will include a little bit of catch-up time, fudge time, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that you're able to adjust your schedule accordingly and still meet that deadline. And finally, resource requirements. I mentioned before that example of a construction site where we're building a project plan. A couple of my resource requirements might include lumber, concrete, rebar, whatever I need to build that building. Are those things available? When are they available? Some of you might know right now that there's a really interesting thing happening in the United States where there's actually a bit of a lumber shortage occurring. And those builders who wish to build houses are having to wait several months for their large deliveries of lumber to build their houses. So as they look at their project plans, they're struggling to figure out, what are the things that I can do before the lumber arrives? What are the things that are dependent, to think back to interdependencies, on that lumber arriving? Again, a straightforward thought and relatively elementary in the scheme of things. But when it comes to project management, we have to be very detailed about the resource requirements, project risks, having a good scope statement, our personal versus project calendars, and interdependencies. The schedule of a project is going to be the thing that you were judged off almost most excruciatingly by any measure. Was it done on time? With the exception of budget, that is what our peers, our superiors, and subordinates alike want to know. Is this project on time? Is it going to be completed on time? I'd like to offer a quick snapshot of a Gantt chart. The Gantt chart is a tool that we use to show some of those interdependencies and to show when major milestones are happening. In this case, I'm offering a simple timeline here from August to March. So from 2020 in August through 2021 in March. We can see the project phases on the bottom: project sourcing, project readiness, a development phase, testing, documentation, and then you can see that adjustment phase in the end, some opportunity to adjust any product that we've made. And then on the timeline itself, you can see some key milestones we want to meet: secure the budget, select our vendors, identify a project manager, stakeholder review, and design and produce ads. As we think through Gantt charts, they're a great way to make sure we can highlight interdependencies, noting that certain things might need to happen either at the same time or one before the other. In the example you see here, you can see that testing and reviews is happening during the development phase. Project readiness does not need to be complete to begin development. Those are key elements in deciding how long this project will take. That is one of the biggest questions we'll face before we talk about budget today. I'll offer that. What is the number one question you're going to get when designing a project? When is it going to be finished, right? A little bit more about the critical path method. The critical path method is an industry standard project management tool that allows us to tell someone the answer to that very question. When will this be finished? Sparing them the details and all the different tasks that need to be done, how do we answer the question confidently, when will this project be finished? So first of all, a couple basics on critical path method. And this is something, again, that you could spend a semester worth of work on, but I want to offer it today to build language in your project management vocabulary. This is the minimum length of time needed to complete a project. It has nothing to do with the time it takes to complete each task. That's not part of your answer. It has nothing to do with, what red herrings might show up during the project. The critical path of any project is simply the minimum length of time needed to complete it. The critical path analysis illustrates the relationships between those tasks in the project that take the most time. Now, many of you are probably thinking there are some serious disadvantages to only telling a person that number. And you're right. We'll just talk through those really quickly. The advantage, of course, tells everyone, here is the minimum length of time it's going to take me. It tells me how long I really have to get the work done and how long I have to produce on my product, on my plan. The disadvantage, of course, is that the critical path is not effective and not as effective as a Gantt chart. If we flip back very quickly to the Gantt chart, you can see how detailed and helpful this is. We can see when all the major meetings are. We can see where major milestones are going to go. We can see what phases are happening when. As I click forward one more to the critical path example, This looks tremendously unhelpful in some ways. It doesn't really tell us what's happening when, it doesn't tell me what phases are happening, but what it does do is it highlights in those red boxes the tasks that are going to take the most time. And that tells me the minimum amount of time I need to complete this project. In this case, task A to task C to task G to task H, telling me that I've got a significant critical path time. In this case, we're looking at, I guess it'd be around 54 units of time, whatever that might be in this critical path example. Notice that we've left out tasks B, D, F, and E in this case. They are not tasks that are required to get to H, and they are also tasks that take a shorter amount of time than task C. That's why that in this first decision point at task A, we've gone to task C. So developing your critical path is really as simple as following the task lines through your longest thread, right? So 10 to 25 to 15 to 4. I'll stop there on critical path. Please know that there is much more to say in this space. There's a science to critical path. There's wonderful software that helps us do this, not only MS Project, but many other industry standard higher level products, frankly, that can help us run critical path methodologies and algorithms for our projects. But this is the fundamental concept for a critical path. A little bit on resources. These are the people, equipment, facilities, funding, and everything else required for the completion of a project activity. Our most important resources: time, people, money. If we don't have any of those three things, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to drive the project forward. A resource plan has to adjust as the schedule changes, has to plan for known needs in advance, has to adapt to meet unknown needs as they arise. So instinctually, we all know that some of these things are things that we might do in our everyday life, right? Adapt to meet unknown needs as they arise. That sounds a lot like a rainy day fund in our budget. Plan for known needs in advance. What are going to be the major expenditures for that building we were building? Well, I know I'm going to need concrete. I know I'm going to need lumber. I know I'm going to need steel, whatever the case might be. Those things we know about in advance. And adjust as the schedule changes. If our boss tells us, well, Adam, why don't you take another month with that ice cream report? It really needs to be good. Now I need to have funding to staff those individuals, maybe conduct additional research. And by conducting additional research, of course, I mean to keep going to the ice cream shop on a daily basis and get ice cream. But we'll have to fund those items, right? We'll need to purchase the research. We'll need to purchase any access to databases that we need to conduct that market research. So we have to adjust as the schedule changes. Creating a budget for a project. A scary subject, and a subject that deserves a lot of time and a lot of consideration. The work breakdown structure, and I want to sort of inspire you today to think about this in a very logical way. We've created our scope statement. Out of our scope statement, we created our work breakdown structure. Out of our work breakdown structure, we've developed a schedule. And now, as we look to the budget, we've got a schedule in front of us, we've got our work breakdown structure, and we have our scope. The WBS is the basis for the project budget, because now you have a structure where you can look at each individual task or subtask and make decisions around what's possible in terms of budget. How much is each task going to cost? How much is each subtask going to cost? And to roll those tasks up. An effective budget is built bottom up as tasks are planned and costs are identified. So we're looking to the lowest level. Ineffective budgets start with words like, let's do that for about $1 million. Let's do that for about $2 million. You have to develop the scope, the work breakdown structure, and schedule first before you can get to a budget. Consensus on the cost of each WBS task element from your project team. As much as project managers are experts in a lot of things, some of the projects that you'll get the most joy from will be those that you do not have expertise in. It'll be projects where you don't know how much it costs to buy concrete, but you are in charge of building the building. You don't know how much ice cream costs, but you are in charge of running the ice cream market research study. You'll have to hire subject matter expertise, and you'll have to get consensus from them on the cost of each WBS task element. In many cases, if you're just doing an estimation effort, meaning kind of scoping out a project, maybe a high-level project management review, you might have to just call and do some research. Call a friend who knows more about it, someone in your network. Do a little bit of research from validated sources that can tell you how much do things like this cost? What does concrete cost per cubic foot? And we can find things like that out and make a great estimate for our superiors and peers. And it's of course informed by the project schedule and the resource plan. So again, as we build up here from scope to work breakdown structure to that schedule and into budget and resourcing, we are now armed with the tools to make good decisions about what's ahead for us in the budget space. I'd like to talk for a minute about people. When Scott introduced me, he introduced me as a leadership coach, and that is first and foremost the thing that I spend the most of my time doing. And so as I think about project management, I always look for the intersection of management and leadership. Many of you have probably read some LinkedIn articles or Harvard Business Review articles, or maybe a book or two on that distinction between management and leadership. When we think about project management, I'd argue that the intersection of those two terms is when we start talking about the people on our team. Leadership is of course, the ability to inspire individuals to do something they otherwise would not have done, they otherwise have not been a part of, they otherwise would not have been so motivated to do. So as we think about leadership in the project management space, we'll spend a few minutes talking about building a great team. Building an effective team is crucial to project management because the people that you bring onto the team will either make or break the product. If you've got the wrong construction team to build that building, it might be unsafe. If you've got the wrong team to put together to do that ice cream market research, it won't come out right, and the CEO might be disappointed in the results. In the worst case, the company might make the wrong decision about which market to invest in. I want to share with you a little bit here, and we'll just derail for 2 seconds off of program management. I can't resist the temptation to talk about leadership. So there are 4 stages in a team building process that many of you might have heard before, but I'll offer them here. Forming, norming, storming, and performing. These are the 4 stages that groups go through when they first get together. First, forming. We get together. We understand our roles, our responsibilities, and the directions that are provided to us as we become acquainted. Everyone is getting along pretty well. You're maybe acquaintances at that point. You're happy to be together, and you understand your individual roles. Then we move into norming. Some cohesion, unity begin to be established. The project manager is providing supportive feedback, and they're fostering community around the project vision. Because at this point, that project leader has a scope to share. They have a work breakdown structure. They have a resource and schedule budget. They're ready to share with the team what the plan is. It's at that point that we begin to see some cracks in teams pretty typically. The team begins to have some disagreements about what resources might be used, some disagreements about when things might be completed, some disagreements about which task should come first, or what the critical path is for a given program or project. The team is going to have to overcome disagreements, interdependencies, conflicts, and groupthink. The project manager will foster win-win relationships and recognize those achievements. So as a project manager, this is your moment to actually step up into leadership. Project management without leadership is really an administrative exercise. So this is your moment to step forward as a leader and say, not only am I managing this project, I am leading these people through this project. Beyond storming, this is sort of beyond the reef, right? Beyond those heavy waves, we meet the need for continuous improvement, innovation, speed, and we capitalize on our core competencies. What does it mean to capitalize on core competencies to a project manager? That means at this point, you appreciate the different strengths that have been offered. In the storming phase, we'll see strengths butt heads. We'll see 2 great data analysts butt heads around what the timeline might be. And we need to understand and appreciate how to take those strengths and move them from side to side, move them to their most value-added space. The project manager needs to recognize new ideas and foster performance in the space. Another leadership item, honoring what's been offered by your project team and fostering that and facilitating that into the conversation of your project management plan. As you build a team, think about these forming, norming, storming, and performing stages. As project managers, there is nothing wrong with some tension on your team. There's nothing wrong with some misunderstanding. All things are healed through communication. All things are healed through leadership. Your confidence as a project manager to say, friends, let's go back to our scope statement. What you're talking about is, frozen yogurt 2 years from now. And our job here is by the end of the month to produce a 10-page report on the ice cream market for the CEO to make a decision about market entry. That is our job. As I coach project managers really frequently on a day-to-day basis, that is the biggest piece of advice I give in multiple different forms. Go back to the scope. What is the scope of this project? Many times you'll find that the fight you're fighting is not scope relevant. It's something that has nothing to even do with your project. It might be an interpersonal issue that you need to work on with more than one individual. It could be a conflict between expertise that needs to be resolved. And as a project manager, you'll need to step forward and make a selection about which expertise you'll follow. So be bold in this space. Remember that just because you're a project manager in title does not exclude you from taking on a strong leadership role as you build your team. Again, the folks in your team will make or break your project. I want to spend about 5 or 6 minutes on risk before we move into the Q&A session. When we think about risk, there's a couple distinctions I want to make for you today that help us appreciate what that word really means. Again, just thinking about some of the words and language you're using today. Project, scope, work breakdown structure, critical path method, resources. Now we'll talk about risk. Risk, of course, an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's outcomes. That's right out of the PMBOK. That's the industry standard guide. It's literally a thick book or a giant PDF that guides the Program Management Institute's guidelines for project management. So that is what a risk definition is in the PMBOK eyes. An issue, an event or condition that has already had a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. Now, that distinction might seem simple enough, but it's really important in project management to make a distinction between the risks you are facing and the issues you are having. And I use that language with great intention. A risk is something that has not occurred. It is something that might happen in the future. If it occurs, it will have an effect on a project's objectives. An issue is something that has already happened. It is happening in the moment. An issue is that Scott is ill today and he is out. He cannot be in the webinar. That is something that is happening in the present tense, and therefore we can call it an issue. A week ago, it was a risk that Scott might get sick before today's webinar and he wouldn't be able to come. So the risk to issue transition is when Scott woke up with a runny nose and said, Adam, I cannot be a part of the webinar today. This is now an issue. It is no longer a risk. The key difference between risk and an issue is that the issues have already happened and issues should be addressed on a day-to-day basis. Risks are reviewed periodically. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but risks are really something that we tackle in a very methodical way. Issues are something that we can be prepared for. Some projects might even have an issue management team or an issue management point of contact to get them organized. But issues come to us day to day. Hey, Scott's sick. What are we going to do? Hey, Adam's sick. He can't do the webinar. What are we going to do? Those are the things that present to us and we handle on a day-to-day basis. It's very important to make that small but important distinction, not only as you go into the project management world, but help others as you are part of project management teams, as I'm sure all of you are. You might have a boss saying, yeah, that might be an issue. It's not to be snide or underhanded, but at least in your own mind, think he's actually talking about a risk. A risk is a future event. No issue can happen in the future. It is a risk. You might recognize this slide. Scope management and risk management are very similar. We want to get into this mindset of a clear cycle, a clear process that we go through on a routine basis to think about risk. A risk is identified. It's documented in a log, which I'll show you a snapshot of in a minute. We do a risk analysis to understand the potential impacts and probability of a given risk. We decide what risk mitigation we can put in place. We implement that risk mitigation, and we go through the cycle again. And around we go on a routine basis within the context of a project. Now, how do we classify risk? How do we get our hands around what is a risk that is critical, moderate, or negligible? I'll offer a very simple chart here, and this is a chart that I've used time and time again in many different project management projects. We have the probability down the left-hand side and the impact across the top in the first row. Negligible, minor, moderate, serious, and critical for impact. And in terms of probability, just a simple Likert scale here. Very likely, probably will occur. About a coin flip, 50-50, right? And then unlikely or very unlikely to occur. It's the intersection of these things where we can gauge if a risk is critical, moderate, or negligible. If you told me something has a critical impact and it's very likely to occur, that's a critical risk at 25 in this example. The numbers I'll offer just for this webinar are notional. We're just using some simple numbers here so yours truly can keep up with the math that we're doing today. If you tell me an impact is negligible and it's very unlikely to occur, that's a 1. It's negligible. I don't really need to worry about it too much. And so on and so forth. If we wanted to pick one in the middle, a probability might be about a 50% chance, but we have a serious impact if it does. That would put us at a 12 in that moderate cycle. So just to appreciate how we classify risk, and you can do this, even these simple structures work very well for even complex projects. Here's what a log looks like. Here's a snapshot from, excuse me, I'll go back one slide. Here's a snapshot from a risk log from a project I was working on just a couple weeks ago. Risk, probability, impact, our assessment, which is simply probability times impact, the actions that we'll take to make sure, the mitigations we'll take to mitigate the risk from happening, and then a really important column that we haven't talked about much yet, risk ownership. Who's in charge of making sure that a risk is under control? Who's in charge of making sure that the mitigation actions are in place? Who's in charge of making sure that if that risk is turning into an issue, they bring it straight to the project leader and say, this is now an issue. A couple of the risks I've mentioned here are a budget shortage, a production delay, or personnel changes. And you can see that they've been identified in different ways: low probability, a low impact; a high probability, a severe impact. And then those are assessed accordingly. Each of them has a risk owner, and you can see some of the actions that I've put there as sort of notional thoughts for today's class. Ensure adherence to the budget, allocate hours in advance, and have a cushion, some good rules to follow, rules of thumb for a budget. Ensure that production is sufficiently resourced and directed in advance, a good way to avoid production delays. And encourage staff to provide significant notice, recruit with intention, meaning select those, bring those onto your team that you know are ready for the project at hand in terms of scope and schedule and resources. I just want to capstone where we've been today before we move into a discussion for the last 10 or 15 minutes and take some questions. Project management success is a result of an understanding of these 5 major spaces. First of all, what does project mean? We talked about that, from portfolio to program to project down to task. In terms of scope, making sure we have the who, what, why, where, when in our simple scope statement. Within scheduling, to appreciate what the interdependencies are within a project, to leverage that work breakdown structure and appreciate what are some of the primary tasks, what are some of the subordinate tasks that I'll need to honor here. In terms of resourcing, thinking about our people, thinking about our budget, thinking about our time, and taking the opportunity in that resource space to find the intersection of leadership and program management. When we have to build not only a team, but a series of individuals, watch them through norming, storming, conforming, and performing, and appreciating those steps as they walk through that as a group, honoring what they're offering, accepting the storms when they come, and being able to feel confident, empowered to make decisions that you'll need to put some of those storms to rest. And then, of course, finally, risk. How do we assess risk using probability and impact? How do we log risk, capture it, and modify it? We talked about two ways to adjust things: scope and risk. The cycles of adjusting a potential issue, considering it with your stakeholders, documenting that potential change, deciding whether to move forward, and then making a choice. In the case of risk, about mitigation. In the case of scope, what are the impacts what are the impacts this scope change might have? Remember, as a project leader, you're not on an island. You can reach out to your resources, to your task leads, to other subject matter experts to make sure that you're as well informed as possible. So we'll move into a question and answer space now. And again, I hope that what we've done so far is just helped you learn some of the language around project management so that we can best appreciate the spaces that we are working through. Let's see here. We've got a couple of questions, and I'll work through these as quickly as I can. We've got several. We've got over 20 questions in here now, and welcome you to add more. And we'll do the best we can in the last 13 minutes here or so. Wendy offers, I don't think that managers like to address problems with staff. They just ignore it. You're not wrong, Wendy, and I wish I could get my hands on those managers as a coach and help them think more broadly about the success they would have if they invested in their problems. I would encourage you to use a little bit of a coach approach management up technique where you help your manager see the issues and make sure that they can see what's happening within an organization, and most importantly, appreciate the detrimental effect, whatever issue you call them problems, whatever issues might be coming up, whatever risks you see that they might need to be aware of. Peter offers, what would we call sets of ongoing tasks without hard dates? That's a good question. We don't have the chat feature here, but I'd love to crowdsource that a little bit. What would we call sets of ongoing tasks without hard dates? I think those might be informal projects, Peter. I don't have a specific word in mind that would capture that, but any group of tasks in my mind is a project, and it might be an open-ended project that you're taking on. Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, PMI is project, not program management. I'm sorry if I misspoke earlier. PMI certainly is the Project Management Institute. And of course, they use, again, the PMBOK document. The scope sentence, again, yeah, no problem, Lisa. So I'll just offer my silly ice cream sentence. No later than the end of the month, Working Group A will produce a 10-page report on the ice cream market to inform the CEO's decision on market entry. No later than the end of the month, when? Working Group A, who, will produce a 10-page report on the ice cream market, what? To inform the CEO's decision on market entry. Why? So those are our big four. Hopefully that's helpful, Lisa. And Lisa offers, regarding scope, the formulation is interesting, but I've rarely seen really anyone thinking in this way or keeping promises. Yeah, certainly. Do you think it's because of lack of preparation? I tend to think that people without the PMP certification perform poorly. Well, certainly, Wendy, no question that first to the PMP point, the PMP, maybe the most powerful portion of a Prince 2 or PMP certification are the experience requirements that come with it. So there's a required number of hours that you have to have been in project management roles, either as leader or as scheduler, resourcing lead, to qualify for those. So Lisa, I don't completely disagree with you. I'm sure there's wonderful project managers out there that don't have a certification, but yes, in general, they do perform better. And I'd offer, I appreciate that you like the formulation. I would say it's not necessarily a lack of preparation, but this is hard work, especially when we get to bigger projects, to get a scope statement really meaningful and really poignant around what to do. It's offered today as a best practice, not necessarily as an international standard or the right way of doing things. It is a best practice that has paid dividends in many cases to really explain the who, the what, the why, the where, the when. If nothing else, that scope statement gives the project lead and maybe some of the senior stakeholders, those task leads, a clear idea of what they are working towards. If it's not in service as a talking point, that's okay. If it's not in service to some flashy presentation that you need to make about your project, that's okay. But that scope statement acts as an anchor for the entire team to build on. And I'll just work through here. How do you decide how much time to allocate for things you've never done before? Excellent. And I talked a little bit about this, Peter. Thanks for that good question after this. There's no question that as a project manager, remember, you have the wonderful opportunity here to claim ignorance and say, I'm not a concrete guy, but I am in charge of building this building. I need to go find out that information. So how much time do I decide to allocate for things? I need to go do that research. That's my job as a project manager. As a project manager, I'm not actually responsible to know all those things. How much concrete do we need? When can it come? How much will it cost? I outsource these things. I have a task lead, a resource lead even, to take care of those items for me, and they can tell me how to do that. So we can really embrace the space we don't know and honor our role, which is manager, not necessarily expert. PM is an expert in the space of management. Yeah, great point, Mark. Mark points out that my clients always come up with a budget before defining a scope. Absolutely. And as program managers and project managers, we will be in a forever battle with our clients around that. They will often throw out, let's do that for 100,000. Let's do that for 200,000. And then they'll tell me what you can do. I'd offer that what you can do is develop a high-level project plan and say, I know you said I could have 200K to do this. Here's what I'm telling you you can get for more or less than that. Provide them a scope that says, here's the type of product you might be able to get if you're willing to spend a little bit more. Shape for them what is possible outside of their budget, and appreciate that. Mark, I'll just say that I really appreciate where you're coming from there. That is the constant battle between project management professionals and our clients. Let me see here, looking for other questions. Oh, thank you. Yeah, a great addition, Robin. A critical path, also known as a network diagram, can be time-scaled and include as many nodes as necessary. Absolutely, a great point. So what I offered there was an illustration, and they, of course, can be scaled up or down as necessary and add as many nodes as needed to appreciate what's happening there. So thanks for adding that. Very true, Ron. Let's see here. Let's see, the comp. Okay, there's a question here on putting storming before norming. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to find the name associated with it. Dan, thanks for commenting there. So the stages that we go through when we get through a team are not something that we intentionally set out to do. They are, from a organizational development perspective, the phases that we naturally pass through as a team. Typically, a project manager can't say we're going to try to do one phase before the other. We simply go through those phases almost as a matter of time, a matter of course. And this happens in everything, even a new group of friends, a new group of, if you've, a cousin of mine I'm thinking of just recently went to college for the first time. She's going to form, norm, storm, and conform with her new roommates, whatever the case might be. So it's not something that a project will necessarily reorder on their own. Let's see here. Great question. Diego offers, what professional skills or development might support or IT professional would support an IT professional today as a project manager? So again, I'd offer that think of project management as a separate silo of expertise that you're developing. all of your experience, whether it's in the IT world, the building world, the ice cream world, whatever comes up for you, is complementary to an expertise in the project management space. A great project manager can be given any project on any subject and understand how to scope, schedule, resources, risk, develop that scope statement, and really take that project from start to completion. So the skill that I would offer gaining would be more study, deeper study than the 50 minutes or so we've had today together into the project management space. Look more into the critical path method, look more into work breakdown structures, look more into scope statements, into some of the best practices around those. Again, what I'm offering today is some industry best practices, not necessarily the right or wrong way. You will find a lot of conversation and often passionate disagreement in the program management space. Let's see here. Just looking through if there's any other questions. Thanks for the nice review. Thank you very much. Yes, my email will be on the last slide. In fact, I think that is presenting now. So you're welcome. Any of you are welcome to contact me, of course, if you have additional questions. I like the distinction Maven's offered, and this might be our last question. You've offered a really good point, and I saw Agile come up in one other question too that I had to skip over initially. I've talked about the waterfall approach, and for those of you not familiar with it, the waterfall approach is kind of the more typical project management approach where we kind of go down the steps of a project. We scope it, we resource it, we explore it, we implement it, and we check for changes and move on. We sort of fall down this waterfall together. The Agile or Scrum methodology encourages approach that might be more efficient in some cases, where we take on tasks simultaneously that might not be taken on simultaneously in the waterfall approach. Absolutely, the question in Maven's case was, can any of these concepts be used in an Agile project? Certainly, at a micro or macro level, these things can coexist. There's not necessarily a choice to make at the beginning of a project that says, well, we're going to do this using the Agile and Scrum methodology, or we're only going to use waterfall methodology. Different methodologies, and program managers, to continue my answer for the last question too, as you dive deeper into this space, appreciating what does it mean to take an Agile approach? What does it mean to take a Scrum approach? What does it mean to take a waterfall approach? Use the PMBOK versus Prince2. Appreciating those different things will allow you to be, no pun intended, Agile within the context of your project and use the approach that works best. Scott, I want to give you a minute to finish up. There are many questions I didn't get to. I'll do my very best if there's 30 seconds after you'd like to close out to answer any more, but thank you so much for attending today. And I hope all of you, again, have just gotten some basic fundamentals today and have a better understanding of the areas you might wish to dig deeper in project management. Scott?
Thank you, Adam. That was a great presentation. As you alluded to, we had many great questions. If you want to take, I do have a little closing, but if you want to take one or two more, we can then then I can sort of wrap up here.
Yeah, sure, Scott. So I'll do a couple quickies here. So Dan, appreciate the offer. He offers that project stages are good concepts, and I agree with that. That's something you dive deep into if you go to a Prince2 or a PMP certification course. Initiating, planning, executing, managing, controlling, and closing. So almost straight out of the project management guidebook to freedom there. Those are some of the stages that we think about in project management: initiating, planning, executing, managing, controlling, and closing. So thanks for offering that, Dan. Let's see here. Not today. Roweno talked about, will there be a certificate issued at the end of today's class? Not to my knowledge. Scott, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks for that. Peter offers, is there any difference between project management inside academia versus industry? Great question. And so the intersection of academia and industry comes in the individual. The standards, the practices, the theory is the same, and what I've offered you today is relatively academic. And when you get to industry, they do their best to apply these, but it's the individual that you'll be working with, that project manager, that program manager, whatever the case might be, and how they implement these theories that you'll see those distinctions. So I'd offer, Peter, that there should not be that dramatic of a difference. In general, industry likes to see standard project management approaches. We mentioned ISO 9000, ISO 9001 earlier with that definition. Those are the international standards for quality and management, and many organizations simply won't hire you if you don't follow those ISO 9000, ISO 9001s. Let's see here. What tools are available for project management in the public domain? I'd consider MS Project as a go-to as a first stop. MS Project is probably the most basic and the most well-known. It is also not always the easiest to work with. I have seen some project managers, and there's many templates online that you can use through Excel. So if you're more comfortable with MS Excel and don't want to learn a new program, you can use Excel to make a basic Gantt chart, a basic list of tasks, projects, work breakdown structures, and a simple Google search, honestly, will usually work best for those. Scott, I think we'll stop there. Again, just wonderful questions. I wish I had more time, but thank you so much for them and appreciate the opportunity today.
Thank you, Adam. And yeah, thank you for joining us. That was a really great presentation. I think we could all take away what you presented and use in our jobs day to day. Just quickly before we wrap up, as there were a few questions that came in, just as a reminder, we will be emailing you the slides and the recording to this webinar tomorrow. The next webinar in the series is titled 10 career mistakes to avoid and how to fix them. That will be held on April 29th at 11 a.m. The IEEE Computer Society is presenting many webinar sort of formats this year. The next two are from our Distinguished Lecturer webinar series. The first one is on April 15th, and to big note, this webinar will be held exclusively in Mandarin on environment modeling based requirements engineering. That webinar will be on this, so that one's on April 15th. The next one presented in English is on the 19th, on April 19th, titled Using Cyber Physical Technology for Speech Language Therapy. You'll be able to register for these three upcoming webinars and all of our other webinars in April and May with the registration link that will be included in tomorrow's email that contains today's presentations and slides. Again, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for today and your grading questions. Adam, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and we look forward to, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.